it was nice.
Did your mom have a good death?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us about that. And I know it's hard to ask that question, but I want to, it's important, and if you feel comfortable talking about it, if you don't, it's okay.
So they were in a long-term care facility.
Yeah.
And my stepfather died of a heart attack while he was eating dinner.
Yeah.
He had just finished playing the violin, he was a very talented
Aww.
man. And he was sitting next to the love of his life.
Yeah.
And so he passed, unfortunately, but he was next to my mom.
Aww.
But then within a month, the pandemic started, and my mom fell and broke her hip while she was alone in the long-term care facility. She had to get surgery, and the next day is when it went into lockdown. We didn't see my mother for over 6 months.
Aww.
And she had to go to a different facility for rehab. She didn't know the people, and all those, rules were in place because of the pandemic.
Right.
When we finally did get to see her, she had gone so far downhill because, she didn't remember her husband. She didn't remember my father. She was kind of remembered us. Of course, she remembered my brother because he was the favorite.
How?
No, but so then it went back into lockdown, and she got COVID.
Aww.
And she stopped eating, and she was a small woman, and she passed, and the last time I got to see her was on FaceTime.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. So there are things that we can do for a good death. Some things we can and cannot plan for, like pandemic, made it very difficult for people to have a good death experience. But if you could have done it differently, what would have happened differently to cause her to have a better experience during death?
We would have looked into long-term care facilities sooner.
Yeah.
Because it was really hard to find one to get them into.
Yeah.
And we were kind of stuck with what had available beds.
Okay.
And we weren't able to vet them as much because we really needed to get them in there on time.
If you had a healthcare advocate who could tell you, these are good facilities, these are bad facilities, this is where the quality of care is going to be very good, this quality of care is not going to be as good, would that have been helpful to you?
Absolutely.
And if you had been present during her death event, do you feel like that would have been something that she would have benefited from?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we all wish we were there.
Yeah. Well, Sabrina, I want to thank you for sharing that very personal information. I hope it helps somebody. And I'm Shannon. This is Sabrina. We're signing off from the Amalfi Coast. Goodbye. Hi. I want to talk a little bit about Sabrina's experience and some of the ways that a life care planning practice, like an elder care coordinator and an elder law attorney working together, could have helped prevent some of the things that we saw in Sabrina's situation, and also, how it might play out differently if things had not been as good as they were. So I want to start off by just talking about this idea of bringing family in early in the planning stages. So, not just family, but your helpers. So, we encourage our trusted contacts to be present, decision makers to be present at the very beginning of the life care planning process. So we like to have everybody on board, understanding the plan and being engaged from the very beginning. And if clients are not comfortable with that, certainly we honor that. But we always are trying to get permission to bring them in as we start to see our clients declining. And that becomes important because those helpers will be the ones to kind of engage and make sure that our people are protected. So you're going to find that in a life care planning practice, we're going to start to see that shifting towards having helpers be engaged. We also want to know what that long-term care policy is. What is the plan for long-term care? If the plan for long-term care is Medicaid, then of course we're going to, at the very beginning, start looking at assets to make sure that if one of the couple or if you're a single person, what would we do if long-term care became necessary? And what assets are exempt assets versus what assets are available? And then knowing that long-term care policy. What does it cover? What does it not cover? Is there a cap? Is it going to cover in-home care? Is it going to cover only facility care? What is the daily cap? And is there any cap on the increase in the cost of that policy? we're going to plan to protect against exploitation. And that means including Ulysses clauses in our trust-based planning. And Ulysses clauses are those clauses where it might require a third party, usually it's your successor trustee, to review a transaction that exceeds a certain amount. And that's the simplest way to explain it. So if you were going to engage in a transaction that included over $25,000, that third party, usually a successor trustee who you trust, is going to have to review that withdrawal and has the potential to disapprove that transaction. So in Sabrina's case, we might have been able to avoid some of the exploitation that occurred. We're also going to use pre-need consents against exploitation, and we're going to use something called the Careful app to monitor assets that are going out that are either like double paying a bill or sending large chunks of money to a nefarious recipient. All of those things become really important, and those would be things that we would incorporate into her plan. We're also going to be using the elder care coordinator coupled with the elder law attorney to monitor what's happening with our people. I always like boots on the ground who have physical contact with our loved ones on a regular basis to report back. Has their dementia progressed, or are they starting to engage in exploitation like symptoms like, writing checks for large amounts of money, being very secretive about the assets, maybe telling strangers about assets. All of those things are clues that we're going to be looking for. And when those things start to happen, that's when we're going to circle the wagons and start to think about moving to a successor trustee to manage assets and really start to drill down and really make sure that our person is not falling victim to scams. Some of the other things that we're going to do at this point is really start to dial into the healthcare issues, making sure that everybody is getting proper healthcare. And if there is an event like a heart attack or a hip being broken, that we're having our people placed in the best facilities who are going to provide the best standard of care. And then we're going to make sure that we check the medical records. Are there bed sores? Is Medicare being fully used? Is our health insurance being fully used? Or are there things that we can layer in that would be covered by Medicare or covered by our health insurance that would provide additional healthcare benefits? And that becomes really important. One of the things that Sabrina talked about during her story was that her mother was really alone when she died. And, even during the pandemic, we know that had there been a transition to a hospice facility, there would have been an opportunity to have physical contact with our person when they were going through the process of death and dying. And that can become very important. And as much as, we remember how hard it was with keeping the pandemic under control, hospice had access. So one of the things we would have recommended in that case would have been a transition to a long-term care hospice bed. If she was at the end of her life and qualified, hospice would have been a much more comfortable way for Sabrina's mom to have left this world, and it would have allowed the family to have access and to have been present when she passed. So, this is it's a very compelling story. I think one of the things that sat with me was, it could have been much worse if they had a family member who was maybe a bad actor, who could come in and unduly influence the two of them. The fact that they had changed their estate plan 15 times would have meant that, if they had a bad actor child who groomed them and tried to engage in undue influence, that could have created a whole nother level of, changing their estate plan to benefit that one bad actor. So, we're lucky that we didn't see that in this case, but that is also something that life care planning practices protect against. It's a lot, and I just find this story very compelling, and I hope it's helpful to some of you to understand some of the pitfalls that are out there when it comes to the sunsetting of our lives, and also in helping our parents understand some of the pitfalls that may be out there for them. All right, I'm Shannon Miller.